Okay, cool, cool. All right. What's going on, people? What's good, family? Had a bit of technical difficulties, but we are here. So glad that you are joining us today. And I'm excited, as always, because I get the opportunity to share with you some ways that you can implement in your life, whether it's related to, nutrition or just personal care, or just even just a word of encouragement. And so that's what I'm here for. Hope that you can take it and apply it some way in your life. And so I hope that you enjoy this segment, and also don't be a stranger. Make sure you like this page, or add a comment. If you like the content, or if you have a question about anything, definitely want to follow up with you, because I do want this to be two-way, not just only one way. But as I share this information, I hope that you really enjoy it. So today, yes, I'm going to share with you 5 cooking tips that you can actually implement. And I'm going to preface this by saying these are tips for you to consider. Now, I know a lot of people will tell you that you should do this or you should do that, but I'm not going to be that way. We're going to change it up a bit. These are, different tips or techniques that I implement that I found that really helped me, and as well as for my health overall. So I not only look at you know if I'm preparing the food the way that it's going to taste, but I also think about the implications of once I do consume it based on this cooking technique. Is it going to give me the best value in terms of not adding a health issue to my body, if I'm doing it a certain way over time. So these are some tips that you can actually implement. And again, these are tips for you to consider. Okay. So, you more than welcome to apply these however you see fit, or if you just don't see any value, that's okay. But, I want to share these with you so you can find some value in them. Okay. Number one is I typically resort to steaming, the opportunities that I can get, or boiling. And I find that those two, between steaming and boiling, give me the best results, especially from cooking vegetables. My better preference would be steaming because, typically I may steam for like 10 to 15 minutes just to soften up the vegetables, but then also, so that they can maintain a crispiness or crunchiness to them, but making sure that I don't overcook them. And so that's why I like to steam it, because it's going to be a less intensive way of applying heat to the vegetables. And then if I don't do steaming, then mainly what I do is boiling. And even if I boil, I do try to be mindful of how long I'm cooking the food, because I know if you're cooking vegetables, it's easy to overcook them. When you look at greens, for example, sometimes people they may cook greens to their almost light green, or I wouldn't say, well, yeah, lighter green, because sometimes it can be dark green, and you just then cook the color out of that green. And I realized that I want to make sure, because you do have essential nutrients, in a lot of vegetables, and a lot of people don't realize, but the longer you cook that, the more that you are denaturing the nutrient. So if it has, let's say, 1,000 milligrams of vitamin A, or of potassium, just a rough number, it's an example. But if you cook it over time, let's say over 15, even 30 minutes, you could only get probably like 500 milligrams of that. And so these are just things that I keep in mind, because, like I say, if you are trying to get certain nutrients, from foods, then, how long you cooking it can play a role in how much you actually retain, or that you actually receive from the food. So I would say between boiling and steaming, um, many other techniques that you could use. Um, but those are typically two that I typically go with. If I do use a pan, like to pan fry, I'm also aware of, you know, um, just how long I cook as well, because it's easy to overcook. And again, you may want to consider not denaturing your foods, and making sure that you can receive the best and the full nutrients from those foods. So I would say that's one tip. If you can, for fruits and vegetables, consider boiling or steaming, or even poaching, which I haven't used heavily, but I know that that's also another option. So number two is when it comes to grilling. Grilling, or even like if you're pan frying, one of the things that I didn't realize, but I also implemented was, the exposure that your food is towards like smoke. So sometimes if you're grilling, a lot of people like the, the charred taste, or I've heard that different people say, well, if this is not have I guess enough char on it, you don't have to even be grilling the food. You could just be pan frying it or even baking it. And sometimes people say I need to see a little bit more darkness or crispiness to it. Sometimes there can be, I would say, a liability if you're consuming that a lot. And the reason why is because you have to realize that if the food is charred, of course, nobody wants to eat burnt food, and you shouldn't, because you know you ingesting burnt food is almost similar to smoking, because that is what you're putting into your body, ash. And you have to realize, like, if you're eating that over and over again, that can have an effect on your lungs, and it can just also cause different health implications. With that, just even the odor of it. I know there's a term called heterocyclic amines, um, and that's essentially a class of carcinogens, or I want to say compounds that can occur in meats, that are typically, I want to say burnt, but they can have a slight charness to them. And so when that occurs, and like I say, if you're consuming that over and over again, like meat that has like a crispiness to it, or even if it's like grill marks, if you're consuming that over and over again, it could have an impact on your overall health. And so, like I said, you want to be mindful of that. And so, one of the things that I've implemented, and again, this is just something for you to consider, but if I do decide, hey, I want to grill, and I may want to have some of that slight smoky flavor to it, but still, not having it directly exposed. Typically what I do is use some foil, and I'll try to wrap it up real good. And typically that way, I've enjoyed the food better, because I don't have to, deal with the char grill marks. So sometimes I just like to enjoy the food whole, but then I just also like to cook it. And so I've done it for different vegetables, even some lean meats in the past that I've used. And I would say that I've enjoyed that better even after eating the food. I didn't feel like there was anything wrong with myself, or I felt like there was a health issue. So again, that's something for you to consider if you are grilling. You can use that approach. Whether you um, use foil to wrap up your food, and then you can cook it that way. So that way, your food is not being directly exposed to smoke, especially if you're using charcoal. If you're using propane, it may be slightly different, but still, um, regardless of which method you use, you may want to avoid doing a lot of charred foods, especially often. Now, if you're doing it every once in a while, then that could be better. But again, just something for you to consider. Because, like I said, I don't want anyone to have any health issues. And so these are things, like I said, I researched and want to share with you, so that way you can implement that. So far, we covered steaming, if you're doing vegetables or even boiling, and then we talked about grilling, as well as pan frying. If you are pan frying meats, you know sometimes people may want to have like a little char to that. But again, if you're doing that over time and you're consuming that char, even if it's light char, it doesn't even have to be a heavy char, but even if you get into your body, that can have an impact on just your ability to breathe, with your lungs getting fresh air. And so it's just something for you to consider. Even bacon, when you are putting food in the oven, if you typically like to see a char your food, then that can also be another source of just a carcinogen that could be present, or essentially where your food is burnt and you consume like the dark part, or the ashy part. And like I said, it doesn't have to be meats, it can even be vegetables. But if you consume that ash, even if it's a small amount, that can still play a role on your overall health. So, essentially, you don't want to overcook your food. And like I say, if you are the type of person where you say, hey, I want to char, just be mindful how often you are consuming, foods that have a slight char to them. So, third point is, and this is kind of going back to um, the first two. But the first one I mentioned is, if you have vegetables, you don't want to overcook them. But the third one kind of goes similar to that, but this is going to be more so involving like your actual serveware or your dinnerware. So like plates. And I know growing up, plastic plates were typically used like at different functions, whether it was a barbecue or even going out to an event, like the see-through plastic plates. And for me, I am a proponent where I typically like to use the best, and that to me, is essentially porcelain or glass products. So, whether it's like a glass Tupperware dish, or even, like ceramic or, glass plates or ceramic plates, those are what I typically like to use. If it can be used for the oven, microwave, I typically like to use those. Plastics, you have to realize, if you can't microwave it, then that would be an issue as well. Because if you can't microwave it, or even put it in the oven, then that to me tells me that that particular product contains something, especially when it's exposed to heat. So to me, I just kind of I keep that in mind, especially. So if you have foods that are hot, think about, okay, if and what I'm putting it on, is it able to be put in the microwave? Is it able to be put in the oven? Is it also able to be put in the dishwasher? Because if it's not going to be heat tolerant, why would I put hot food on it? And so even just in the past, using plastic plates, that's just a no-no, especially when it comes to hot food. When I see a plate making a face at me when food is on it, that typically tells me all I need to know about that. So, case in point, again, if you want the best, I would, recommend really investing in some higher quality plate products, for your home, or even glassware. They do have glass Tupperware dishes. Typically, most of them that I've seen, they can come with the bottom, so whether it's square, circle, rectangle, even small shapes and sizes, even big enough to where you can put a chicken inside of it or vegetables. But they also come with lids, and usually most of the lids tend to be plastic. But I usually like those because, again, you can put them in the oven, you can put them in the microwave, and you can also do them by dishwasher, or you can hand wash them. So that's just something, like I said, that I've done is, really just doing like a haul, of all the plastic Tupperware, get out and get in with the glassware. So that's what I'm doing. So that's the third tip when it comes to cooking, or slash preparing food. Another tip, and I know some people probably won't like what I'm about to say, but another tip when cooking is you probably want to minimize the salt addition. And the reason why I say is because, again, salt is going to be in mainly a lot of foods that you're consuming. So if you're already consuming a lot of processed foods, which I, would recommend you consider reducing that, for your overall health. But if you're already consuming a lot of processed food, 90% of the time you don't need to add any salt, yeah, especially if you're concerned about your daily intake. Trust me, if you consume a lot of processed foods, you are getting your recommended sodium amount, and you're actually probably getting two servings. You're probably getting double of that. So recommendation is, I know sometimes it's easy to do like the dash of salt that is shown on the back of the packages, whether it's pasta or rice. But you also want to be mindful of that. Okay, high blood pressure does not occur overnight. And by you taking this mindful approach, you can actually reverse it, even if you don't or know you are aware of having it. It's just something important for you to consider when cooking. And to go with that, and this is probably like a 4.1 point, but to go with that, um, or I guess this would be point number five. But when you're using certain oils, I typically like to use olive oil. Um, Very rarely, but I may use like a coconut oil. And typically, it use these because of the higher smoke point. And so I know coconut oil tends to have a higher smoke point. I'm not sure if it has a higher one than olive oil, but the smoke point essentially is when you're cooking the food. And of course, when it gets to a certain temperature, it starts to smoke. And typically, the higher the smoke point, the better it is for you to use in that particular oil. Because again, what happens is, that oil can essentially oxidize and it can cause smoke, and that's not good for you, especially when you're cooking. And so, you want to make sure that when you're using certain oils, that you can use those. I like to use olive oil because it's a good type of fat. Um, I'm not sure if some people use avocado. I haven't explored that, but if you do, nothing against it. But these are just two oils that I typically use. Olive oil is the primarily one that I use. I haven't used coconut oil as much in terms of cooking, but if you were going to use any cooking oils, I would recommend those ones that have higher smoke point, as well as the fat content to determine, if it has a higher saturated fat content or mono unsaturated fat or polyunsaturated fat content, because those are different, in terms of how they can, affect the body, especially with long-term use. So those are five. Kind of doing like a recap. First one is, if you want to healthy way of cooking your vegetables, you can opt for steaming. That's typically what I like to go to, but I know most of the times if I'm busy, I typically just go with boiling, or of course microwaving. Even though if I had more time, I would do both, steaming and boiling a lot. But sometimes, in terms of a busy schedule, go with what is going to be a little bit more convenient. But I still also make the effort to do the steaming and the boiling. When it comes to grilling, make sure that you can protect your food from a lot of smoke, especially if you're eating a lot of grilled foods or barbecued foods. You can use not plastic wrap, but you want to use aluminum foil. Definitely don't want to use plastic wrap, but you want to use you can use aluminum foil to wrap up your foods, and it will create like a very nice protection around your food as well as cooking. And like I say, I enjoy it. I don't get a lot of smoke in it, just a little bit, but I still enjoy it. It's almost like as if I cooked it inside, whether it's on the stove, in the oven, but without all the char. Third tip was, out with the plastic and with the glass, in terms of like plates or um, Tupperware. And I typically like to use those just because of the quality. So, and then the fourth one was, being able to be mindful of salt addition, because when you're cooking, you don't need a lot, and also thinking about reducing that. So, because sometimes you may cook like soups, which I know contain a lot of salt, um, in different pasta dishes. Um, it's usually salt heavy, but you may want to consider cutting back on the salt, because again, if you consume the salt and you don't keep just any idea of how much you're consuming daily, it could come back to really be painful for you. So you want to be mindful of it before you go to your doctor's office, because um, I'm sure any news about high blood pressure is never any pleasant news. So these are just some things for you to consider. And then the last one, um, God, the last tip was, but Man, I actually forgot what the last tip was, but because I know I've shared a lot. But anyway, so that was on that. Oh yeah, the last one was on cooking oil. So typically I like to use olive oil because of the smoke point. And if you're cooking at high temperatures, you typically want to cook at a lower the temperature you're cooking at, the better. But typically, I know between olive oil and coconut oil are going to be the best oils in terms of cooking it. Based on their smoke points. And I think coconut oil may be higher. Don't quote me on that because I have to go back and look at it. But yeah, those are just some of the tips. There's many more. And again, there's many more ways that you can cook, prepare food. But these are just 5 ways that, again, you can consider to use or implement if you say, hey, I want to look at some better ways of cooking or just my health, something's just off. Hopefully, these 5 can really give you some ideas. And if you want, I can give you some bonus ones. So, like I mentioned, for Tupperware, like glass Tupperware instead of plastic Tupperware or plastic plates. You can also do the same for your utensils. And I've had experience with just not the best utensils. Sometimes using the utensils, picking up hot foods, and it just bends back. And I just had to throw that away because I was like, I'm not eating that. Not me. And so typically I like to go for like the stainless steel, the heavy duty, I'm not sure if they make glass utensils, but typically I like to go with sturdy metal utensils that are going to have a longer durability, as well as they don't rust easily, but they do provide a kind of like great longevity, as well as use. So I typically like to go for those like the stainless steel utensils or even serving utensils. Plastic is just so cheap and accessible to get, and so I tend to avoid those. Unless I'm using like cold foods, but still I like to get some quality ones. So, it's important that you can also look at that like some quality utensils, even like glasses, like drinking glasses or wine glasses. Not that I drink wine, but I just like to use it. With drinking water or just preparing some of the foods that I have with like different spices. And so I tend to just use those glass bowls. So, I mean, these are just things that you can consider, when you're cooking. And they can also help, if you say, hey, I don't want to have a lot of plastic exposure, there are some alternatives. And it's actually a lot more than what I'm sharing. So, I hope that you enjoyed this segment. If you did, make sure you give a thumbs up, like, follow this page, and also make sure that you follow us on, follow us at robody.org. That is robody.org. Make sure you sign up for our emails. I'll be sending out email content to you, and this is just going to bless your life because, as I've shared with you here, do the same thing for our emails, sharing some great content for you that you can apply in your life as you see fit. Again, none of this is telling you what you should do. It's just a recommendation for you to consider implementing. So, again, make sure you give us a like, thumbs up, follow us, even share our content. If you enjoy this content, trust me, I do want to hear your feedback. If there's something you say, hey, Jerry, I would like to learn more about this or hear more about this, feel free to share. I'm always open to just feedback. So make sure you leave a comment. I won't bite, I won't come after you. I'm not that type of person where I really take a lot of comments, to heart. But, I do want to know any feedback that you have. Feel free to share it. And until next time, I will see you later. And I hope that you enjoy this week.